welcome back to Zero Production Value Movie Reviews. I'm Hoernke, and today I'm going to be discussing the 1970 film MASH, directed by Robert Altman. So I don't think ever have I seen, maybe there has been, but I can't really think of something where there was a film and then an adaptation into a television show where the television show became much more the cultural icon and, you know, more widely popular than the film. Usually TV shows adapted from films end up kind of sucking, but in this case it was exactly the opposite. But that being said, the film also was widely praised at the time. It won an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. It had a total of 5 nominations, including Best Picture of the Year. It also won the Palme d'Or at that year's Cannes Film Festival that they give to their Best Film of the Year. It was also the 3rd highest grossing film of the year behind Love Story and Airport. So it was a commercial success as well as a critical success. I also find it interesting that when I read that little tidbit that the 3 highest grossing films of the year were 3 movies nominated for Best Picture of the Year. It shows you a little bit how far we've come, and our movies now are much more, you know, popcorn entertainment fare, whereas back then, you know, popcorn entertainment fare could be the more meaningful movies of the year that they thought deserved Best Picture nominations. Also, the film brought us the wonderful song "Suicide is Painless," which would go on in instrumental form to become the iconic theme for the television show. So here Altman weaves a brilliant satirical wartime tale following an irreverent group of doctors and nurses set during the Korean War. Donald Sutherland, Elliot Gould, and Tom Skerritt are, let's say, the 3 zaniest of the bunch, and the ones whose hijinks and antics we follow throughout the course of the story. We watch them as they womanize and booze their way through pretty much everything they do. It's interesting because I like to draw a parallel between what you see in these doctors at this time and then something later on, like in a more recent television show, House, or something like that, where he wasn't really, you know, comedic, but zany and irreverent, yes. And also it indicates that with great skill and acumen, great latitude is given. House got away with so much because he was so good at his job. And here you see the same thing that also gives them tremendous power to wield in their case. Now, while this is set nominally during 1951, during the Korean conflict, this is a very thinly veiled commentary on the Vietnam War, as you got to think this is in 1970, so we've been in Vietnam for over 10 years, and we're still not getting out of it for another, I think it'd finally wrap up 4 years in 74, essentially. 1967, 3 years prior to this, really marked a sort of turning point in film, away from a lot of the studio production model, and in came a slew, maybe not a slew, but some filmmakers who were kind of renegade and avant-garde and were able to, you know, buck the trend and were able to do stuff that was edgy and outlandish and challenged audiences more and had a bit more in touch with the counterculture of the youth of modern America, which is one of those where MASH kind of fell into that. Altman juxtapose the dark satire of the humor of the doctors and their antics with the real world horror of the operating room and how serious that was. I mean, there were men coming from the front lines broken and being stitched back together, you know, in this operating theater. So, that being said, there are some negatives that go along with this story. You can't, it has to rain sometime, I suppose. But in looking at it, I'm always loath to take too much of our present day thought process and culture and try to put it in a box from 30, 40, 100, 200 years ago. You know, it's that presentism where people's mentalities then don't necessarily line up with people's mentality now. But still, that's still pushing through the era of women's rights and civil rights and all that. So there were three big themes that I saw that were like sort of cringeworthy in the way that they dealt with him. And like, so one was their take on religion. They very blatantly were anti-religious in this movie. They took the most devout among them, which was Robert Duvall's Frank Burns, and they turned him into a, you know, basically a sinister, serious taskmaster that, you know, tripped over the line to raving lunatic and had to get carted off to the funny farm. And then there's Father Mulcahy, who, well, he was very well liked and was not openly mocked, but still he played kind of the fool to these guys' antics, you know, in more than one occasion. You know, the butt, not necessarily the butt of a joke, but the guy who just, you know, didn't get what's going on and was kind of the foil. And then there's the sexism angle. Like, the sexism is rampant, and I was trying to understand if that was them trying to say, like, hey, this is what if it represented the thought process of American thinking in the early 1970s when the film was made, if that's what they were trying to say, this is what people acted like in the early 1950s when this was set, you know, or were they still trying to be satirical, because this is a dark satirical comedy. And were they using that as a lens to shine light on this sort of thing? But a lot of their sexist antics crossed the line into what today we would easily consider harassment. So, I mean, you have to kind of weigh all those things and see where you end up landing. And then the least of these negatives, although, you know, you could argue that, but because it's not blatantly racist throughout the narrative, but they do have a character that's called Spear Chucker, and everybody seems to be fine with that. Yeah, I'm not even going to go there. I'm just pointing it out. All right, so I'm going to get off the politically correct horse now and say that there are a lot of good things done in this film, and I understand all the film's great qualities, but I just believe you do have to point out some of the negative concerns that happen. There's no denying the importance of this film, and it does serve as a testament, I believe, to an American mentality at that time, not only regarding its young people, but also its thoughts about our government and being in the Vietnam War. And it took some very dark, wry humor and gave it an original, interesting way to look at a wartime drama. And you have to remember, too, that in 1970, you know, we just didn't see movies about Vietnam. They weren't made. I mean, they were still in it. I mean, it wasn't until much later you get a lot of the Vietnam-era films, the late 70s for Deer Hunter and Apocalypse Now and Coming Home, and into the 80s for stuff like Platoon, Hamburger Hill, and the like. So, also, this was it seemed like Altman had had a really prolific career as a television director earlier before this, but this really marked his entrance into feature film directing. I think he had one film before this, but he would go on to, for the next 30 years, produce some amazing films, and I think when all is said and done, be one of America's great directors, but also I think in this day and age, a slightly forgotten, underrated director. And this was his first foray into this type of film, which he would continue to do. So, all in all, I would have to give MASH, directed by Robert Altman, a B+, all things considered. I love you. I appreciate you. Thanks for watching my movie review. As always, I'm Eric Hoernke, rhymes with turnkey. Like, subscribe, ring the bell. And as always, this has been a production of Zero Value.